Hey guys, tonight we're descending into a world of damp stone and flickering torchlight, where shadows slither across the walls like half-forgotten nightmares. You step into this subterranean chamber, the air thick with the coppery scent of old blood and the faint tang of mildew. Your boots echo against the rough-hewn floor, and you can almost taste the cold moisture clinging to the stones. Honestly, you probably won't survive this, but that's half the fun, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so we know how late you're pulling this all-nighter. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge further, the torch in your hand sputtering as if protesting this morbid tour. Damp droplets fall from the arching ceiling overhead, each one a cold reminder that this place hasn't seen sunlight in centuries. In fact, many medieval castles tucked these torture chambers into their basements as early as the 12th century, carving cells into bedrock beneath the keep to keep unwanted screams from echoing through the halls. You rub a trembling hand along the wall, feeling the rough texture of limestone pitted with age. A fringe anecdote whispers that some torturers once coated these walls with honey to attract swarms of flies, turning the room into a buzzing, crawling nightmare for anyone unlucky enough to be bound here. Historians still argue whether those honey-coated walls were an intentional method of torment, or merely the leftover byproduct of hives stored above in happier times. The corridor opens into a wider chamber. Your ears pick up distant drips and faint clinks of metal. The torchlight dances across iron rings anchored into the cold floor, and you can almost hear the chain rattles as prisoners were dragged in. A modern voice in your head snickers, "Makes for a killer Airbnb, doesn't it?" But you shush. It's his serious business, albeit with a wink. You feel the floor slope underfoot, an intentional incline to funnel runoff from spilled water. Or worse. Medieval engineers were oddly pragmatic that way. If someone bled out here, they didn't want to slip in the puddles. Beneath the highest arch, a bench of polished oak sits stained and slick. At first glance, it looks too clean, until you notice the shallow groove carved along its length where blood once pooled. Bench torture was a fairly common medieval punishment for heretics or accused thieves. And court records from 14th century France mention its use at royal decree. They'd lash prisoners down, twisting ropes tight to stretch limbs and send shockwaves through joints. As you press a finger into the wood, the grain feels almost smooth, as if someone spent hours sanding away splinters, and maybe that's because some torturers also fancied themselves carpenters, keeping their tools in tip-top shape. You step carefully around a trough carved into the stone. Its purpose was simple yet horrifying: funnel water, dripped onto a captive's forehead for hours on end in a precursor to modern waterboarding. Scribbled graffiti near the trough warns, "May your head be as cracked as this basin." Such taunts, where common torturers had a twisted sense of humor. Historians still argue whether medieval water torture was widespread or mostly afeared. Rumors spread by enemies to dissuade rebellion. Either way, the dripping never stopped, and the prisoners' tortured patience became a weapon unto itself. A low arch to your right holds a table scattered with implements, iron spikes dull with corrosion, a coil of rope knotted in grotesque patterns, and a set of pliers with spring hinges stiff as broken promises. You lift one plier and test its weight. It feels unnervingly familiar, like the gadget your cat toy might come with, only meant for human flesh. A light joke flits through your mind. Cats probably thank us that these never ended up in pet stores. But behind that humor lurks the truth. Thumbscrews and finger crushers were meticulously designed to inflict pain without immediate death, prolonging the agony. Mainstream records note the English crown employed thumbscrews, ostensibly during the 15th century, to extract confessions from suspected spies. The air grows colder as you approach the far wall, where dark stains blot the stones in irregular patterns. You can almost imagine the torchlight revealing a huddled figure, chains chafing against wrists. A solitary iron ring hangs at head height. Some believe it held a hooded prisoner suspended while coals burned beneath. Others claim this was just a convenient anchor for dragging bodies to the execution site. Historians still argue whether that ring was part of a suspension ritual or simply a relocation device for moving heavy stones. Either way, its presence reminds you that this chamber witnessed more than whispers and tears. It was a crucible of terror. A sudden breeze makes the torch sputter again. You glance up to see a sliver of moonlight piercing a narrow arrow slit high above. For centuries, sentries posted above would peer down, ensuring no one escaped. The narrow opening also served to funnel fresh air in and stale air out, practical medieval ventilation. Or perhaps a cruel psychological ploy to let prisoners glimpse the outside world they'd never see again. You lean closer, the floor cool under your palm, and you almost feel the prisoner's cold dread. It's unnerving how concrete this place feels. It's as if centuries of suffering seeped into the mortar itself. Further back, you notice a shallow pit lined with broken bones, remnants of medical experiments or unchecked cruelties. In most scholarly circles, it marks a transitional phase in torture methods. It's moving from blunt instruments to more refined devices that targeted nerves and consciousness. A fringe theory even suggests some medieval physicians tested rudimentary anesthesia techniques here, mixing opiates with herbal concoctions to study pain threshold. Historians still argue whether those experiments were medical research or simply inventive cruelty. You exhale, the air tasting of damp stone and distant sorrow. Your eyes catch the glint of something on the floor. A single rusted chain link, worn smooth as if by thousands of hands grasping and straining against it. Instinctively, you pick it up, feel its weight. This link is older than any of us, older than the castle above, older than most towns in the valley. It holds stories untold, cries unheard, and a promise that these walls remember. Glancing back the way you came, you realize this is just the prelude. The chamber holds its breath, ready to reveal more secrets. You carefully replace the chain. Link, steel blinking in the torchlight, one final time before you venture deeper into the darkness. You step over the rusted chain link you found moments ago and cross into a long, narrow room. Here, the air shifts from dank stone to the sharp tang of oiled wood and iron. In the center stands the rack. Two massive rollers mounted at each end of a heavy oak frame, connected by grooved iron bars. Your torchlight glints off the polished wood, buffed smooth by centuries of usor, perhaps polishers with a twisted sense of pride. You run a finger along one roller's groove, feeling the nearly imperceptible ridges that once gripped ropes around a prisoner's wrists and ankles. As you circle the device, you notice how the side posts slope inward, guiding the bars into place. Someone in the Middle Ages must have studied carpentry and orthopedic torture design at the same time. A faint hollow creak drifts through the chamber as if your mere presence tugs on hidden gears. You can almost hear the wheeze of wooden joints, aged past their prime. A sound that rivals any creaking door in an old haunted house, though with fewer ghosts. Admittedly, historians generally agree that the rack emerged as early as the 14th century in southern Europe. Particularly in Italy, though, its precise origins remain unclear. The Spanish Inquisition famously set up racks in their interrogation chambers around 1478, using them to extract confessions from accused witches and heretics. English records from the Tower of London under Henry VIII describe a similar device. Known locally as the Duke of Exeter's daughter, a grim nickname that underscores how torturers tried to humanize objects, even as they twisted flesh. Mainstream sources confirm its widespread use across Europe during the late 10th, 15th, and early 16th centuries. But there's a fringe theory whispering through dusty archives. Some scholars claim the earliest rack was actually a repurposed wine press. The story goes that a disgruntled vintner, angered by repeated raids on his cellar, strapped thieves into his wooden press to wring out confessions as easily as he squeezed grapes. The image of drunk merchants turned torturers makes you suppress. A laugh medieval happy hours must have taken a dark turn indeed. Historians still argue whether this winepress origin is fact or fancy. But the idea lingers like the scent of fermenting grapes in an underground vault. You crouch to study the ratchet-hand pawl mechanism at one end of the rack. A large iron wheel sits poised to crank, each click and clack winding a central rope tighter around those bound. Even at rest, the wheel's teeth seem hungry, ready to bite deeper with every turn. A stray breeze stirs the smoke from your torch, making shadows tiptoe across the rough-hewn ceiling. If you listened closely, you'd swear you could hear a faint, mocking whisper. One more click won't hurt. You push the thought away, chalking it up to your imagination, your inner prankster with a murky sense of humor. You rise and follow. A shallow trench cut around the rack's base. Water stains streak the floor, so you imagine torturers dousing the wood between sessions to keep it from warping, or perhaps to rinse away blood. A less Sunni anecdote claims they sometimes soaked the ropes in salt water before binding prisoners, ensuring rope burn added another layer of agony. You can almost taste the salt in the air, bitter and unsettling, like the aftertaste of tears. A quick joke springs up. Chiropractors today. Take note, this is definitely a malpractice case. The corners of your lips twitch, but you rein in the grin. You remind yourself that humor is your shield against the darkness, a small rebellion in the face of centuries-old cruelty. Beyond the mechanism, you spot shallow chisel marks on the beam likely added to roughen the wood and keep limbs from sliding, increasing the torment even when the wheel wasn't turning. Your boots clack against the stone floor as you circle to the opposite end, where a groove in the wall holds a set of iron pegs. These pegs served as anchor points for the ropes, allowing torturers to adjust leverage and pressure. Some records indicate that skilled inquisitors could apply up to 800 pounds of tension, enough to stretch joints, tear ligaments, and slowly pull limbs from sockets. You gingerly touch one peg. It's cold and slick with corrosion. Its head is worn smooth, as if countless hands gripped it, each turn ratcheting up the scream as you glide past. Your gaze locks on an inscription carved into the side beam. A crudely drawn gallows and the date 1493. Local lore suggests this rack was transferred from the dungeons of Florence to a private castle in the French countryside after a revolt crushed the local Inquisition. A cheeky footnote in a traveler's diary mentions the device broke under a particularly stubborn prisoner whose identity remains a mystery. Some say it was a knight with iron will. Others claim dark magic saved him. Historians still argue whether that story came from a genuine witness or was propaganda meant to demoralize foes. You lean in, feeling the grain of the oak beneath your fingertips, and wonder what that night's final confession might have been. Another fringe gossip suggests that the earliest rackmaster convinced victims to sign their own release orders by promising a swift end, only to crank the wheel harder once the papers were signed. You half expect to find a stained parchment, tucked under the rack, but all you sense is silence. The torchlight dances across the ceiling's gloom, and you notice an archway on the far wall. You step away from the rack, mentally bookmarking its every detail, and advance toward what might be the next chamber. The rack's clack-clack still echoes faintly behind you, its teeth sounding like a watchful predator prowling the darkness. Before you cross the threshold, you glance back one last time. The wood gleams ominously, nearly seductive in its craftsmanship. You can almost hear the distant squeal of timber bending under unbearable pressure. A final joke flickers through your mind. Think twice before signing up for medieval-themed yoga retreats. With that, you turn to face the unknown beyond, your heart steady, ready for the next chapter of torture's dark evolution. You push open a creaking door and step into a narrower chamber, where the only light comes from a single torch flickering against rough stone walls. The smell of dampness is tainted now by the faint metallic temps of iron and old sweat. You sweep your gaze across the floor, noticing the dusty outline of a large triangular platform set at an uncomfortably steep angle. At its apex, a single iron spike points upward like a malevolent flower ready to bloom. This is the Judas cradle, and somehow seeing it in person feels absurdly intimate. Walking closer, you spot the ornate carvings along the base, twisted vines and grotesque faces that leer at you as though amused by your bravery. A modern voice in your head quips, "I didn't realize medieval woodworkers had such a flair for home decor." Cue, hush it, letting only a soft chuckle slip past. The platform's surface is worn smooth in places, likely where countless victims shifted and squirmed in desperate attempts to keep their dignity intact. You press a fingertip against the spike's tip, not sharp enough to pierce, but chillingly solid, they say. It was tempered to avoid breaking under weight. The last thing torturers wanted was a soggy spike. Mainstream accounts trace the Judas cradle back to 16th century Spain, with inquisitors allegedly using it to punish blasphemers and suspected witches. It's the Spanish word for throne of discipline. Silla de Disciplation first appears in Inquisition records around 1572. According to these documents, prisoners were hoisted above the spike, then gradually lowered until their weight bore down on the point. The slow descent was part physical torture, part psychological torment, as each inch brought fresh panic. Even modern torture experts find the description enough to make them reconsider their career choices. Yet a fringe anecdote suggests that the original design might have been a satirical invention by a jester-turned-rogue artisan, intended as a prank on a cruel court official. Supposedly, the jester hid in the basement, swapped blueprints, and watched in glee as the official tested the prototype on goats, fortunately sparing humans until the wheels of bureaucratic horror took over. You snort at the image. Unpaid court entertainers and confused goats, of all things. Medieval comedy must have been delightfully twisted. You step down into the trough below the spike, the stones slick underfoot. A shallow trench encircles the platform, designed to catch, well, everything. You crouch to inspect it, running your fingers along the chipped channel. Rustic gouges and rust stains form a chaotic mosaic of past horrors. A tiny voice within you murmurs, if this were a spa, they'd call it the exfoliating plunge, and you stifle a laugh. It's easy, somehow. Humor shields you from the reality of this device's purpose. Shadows dance across the slanted platform as your torch flickers. You climb the few steps carved into the stone wall and stand before the spike, your heart pounding against your ribs like a frightened bird. You imagine what it felt like to be seated clothed, bound at the wrists and ankles, and then forced down inch by inch. The living weight of your own body bearing down on iron, The sensation must have been equal parts terror and disorientation, as victims gasped and fainted in turn. Mainstream historians agreed that confessions extracted under this method were notoriously unreliable, since few could coherently answer questions while fighting unconsciousness. You trace the rope pulleys at the head of the platform, noting how the torturer could control descent speed. Each pulley wheel is grooved with old rope fibers, worn as thin as spider silk. A stray breeze makes the pulley wheel spin lightly, emitting a soft, unsettling creak like a hinge on a coffin. You let the silence press against your ears. Then, crack a grin. Whoever invented this deserved a Most Creative Device award, followed by immediate demotion. Oddly, some chroniclers claim the Judas cradle was also used ceremonially as a bizarre entry rite for secret societies. According to these whispered legends, initiates who refused to swear loyalty would be invited to sit upon the spike as a test of resolve, though no concrete records survive. Historians still argue whether these tales are more than just fanciful storytelling spun around tavern fires. You hunch down, imagining a group of cloaked figures chanting as someone teeters on that point. It's so theatrical, it feels like a scene from a Gothic play. Standing back, you notice faint etchings on the wall behind the device. Names, dates, and tiny hearts crudely carved by victims who dared to mark their passage through this grim threshold. One scrawl reads Maria Y. 1580, and you wonder if Maria was a heretic, a suspected thief, or perhaps someone who simply annoyed the wrong inquisitor. You brush your hand over the initial, nearly erasing the fragile inscription. Soft joke. Bubbles up? At least they left no Yelp review. You bite your lip, mindful that gallows humor is a tightrope walk between coping and disrespect. Your eyes drift to an iron ring bolted into the wall, a sturdy hook where a chain once dangled. Legend says that after a session on the spike, some victims were left hanging to display their broken bodies as a warning. Other accounts insist the chain was a later addition used only to haul the machine into place for traveling inquisitions. Historians still argue whether the chain belonged to the cradle or was part of separate execution paraphernalia. Whatever the truth, the hook's presence reminds you that torment rarely came in isolation. It was part of a system. You stepped down and circled the device, the cold floor sending a chill up your legs. The platforms would feel unnervingly smooth, as if polished by unseen hands over centuries. Yet here and there you find splinters. Tiny reminders that even the most refined torture left scars on the instruments themselves. A small, deflated laugh escapes you. Say what you will about quality craftsmanship, doesn't fix design flaws. Leaning forward, you peer into the trough beneath the spike. The stone here is worn concave, shaped by decades of eroded sweat, blood, and who knows what else. The pattern resembles a macabre basin, one that no modern artist could replicate without feeling sick. You imagine the echo of dripping fluids, each drop a metronome, marking moments of utter despair. It's a sensory detail that grips your chest, making you acutely aware of every breath. Your gaze drifts upward to the spike, itself dark iron, tapered but blunt enough to maximize pressure over time. It's almost elegant in a twisted way, a perverse sculpture of pain. You reach out, lightly tracing its curve, and for a split second, you feel the spike's cold promise. A slow push, a surrender of flesh, followed by either confession or unconsciousness. You start to crack a joke about sadistic dentists, then catch yourself. This is too real, too intimate. You step off the platform and extinguish your torch against the wall. Darkness envelops you for a heartbeat before you relight it. The Judas cradle stands silent and untouched now, its files and configurations already shifting into your nightmares. With a final exhale, you back away, your boots echoing on the flagstones, and move toward the next chamber. The spike's ominous angle fades in your torchlight as you turn the corner, carrying its weight in memory. You ease open a heavy iron door and step into a chamber scented with rust and aged oak. In the center stands the infamous Iron Maiden, a coffin-shaped shell of blackened iron. Its hinged fronts studded with spiked protrusions that glint in your torchlight like tiny, malevolent teeth. You shiver as you recall the rack's ratcheting gears and the Judas cradle's sinister spike. This device somehow feels even more personal. It's like a grim invitation to lie down and meet thousand-pointed steel. Your boot hits uneven flagstones, sending your torchlight skittering across the Maiden's lid. You lean closer, running a fingertip along one of the spikes. It's blunt but unyielding, designed not to puncture, but to prod and imprison flesh against the cold iron. Modern historians widely agree that no evidence exists of medieval torture chambers housing an ironclad coffin. The earliest recorded mention comes from a sensationalist 19th-century German pamphlet describing Nuremberg's Eisernjungfrau. By the time it appeared in museum collections, many experts suspected it was an invented relic meant to stoke public horror and fill exhibition halls. Fact: a breeze drifts through a narrow arrow slit high above, carrying the scent of damp earth. You imagine the device sitting lonely in a corner, its lid propped open for curious visitors to gawk at. Fringe lore insists that gypsy caravans once repurposed similar cabinets as hidden wine cellars, using the spikes to hang cured meats and cheeses. You can't help but smirk at the idea of medieval chismongers browsing a mobile Iron Maiden, complaining about how tight the selection is. Historians still argue whether any of these bizarre repurposings happened or are just the product of overactive imaginations. Stoked by dime-a-dozen ghost stories, a low wooden bench nearby holds a scattering of iron nails and leather straps. Pick up a strap, feeling its frayed edges and smelling the faint tanned hide. According to popular accounts, torturers would bind victims inside the Maiden and then close the door, forcing them to crush against the spikes as panic set in. Yet serious scholars note the cabinet's interior lacks proper venting or drainage, making prolonged confinement unlikely without risking suffocation or infection. Hardly the slow theatrical show the public had come to expect from grand inquisitions. You tap the Maiden's side with your knuckles. The sound rings hollow, like a mallet striking an empty barrel. A stray echo dances behind you, and you're reminded of the rack's hollow creak and the cradle's coffin hinge. It feels as though walls themselves are mocking you, whispering, "Careful, you might get locked in." You tuck that mental note away. No coffin naps tonight. As you circle the Iron Maiden, your torchlight reveals a set of crudely carved initials on the wall. UB 1828. Maybe someone scratched it to claim they'd survived the display. Or perhaps it marks the date of a hoax unveiling at a traveling fair. One tale claims a traveling showman built the first Iron Maiden to boost ticket sales. Betting locals would pay to witness a live torture reenactment. When word spread that no one had ever been inside for real, his profits soared even. If the performance was all for show, you reach out and tug the cabinet door's heavy ring. The hinges creak, protesting decades of neglect. You pause, imagining what it would feel like to step inside and hear that lid clank shut. It's a morbid curiosity that tingles your spine. A joking thought flits through your mind, perfect for in-laws who overstay their welcome. You snort quietly and push the door closed, the clang echoing like a verdict. Then you flip it back open, unable to resist the pull of its grim geometry. Across the floor, a narrow drainage channel cuts under the Iron Maiden's base. You kneel to inspect it, noting tiny chips in the stone and brownish stains where liquid once pooled. Some fringe enthusiasts propose it was meant to collect spilled wine or beer during festive tortures, turning screams into cheers and making cleanup a cinch. You imagine a medieval punch bowl and cringe. Historians still argue whether that channel was original to the Maiden or added later by showmen wanting to keep the device sparkling for paying crowds. Your torchlight trembles as you rise, and for an instant the spikes look less like punishment and more like a crown and iron halo promising martyrdom. It's an unsettling symmetry. Torturers cast their victims as grim saints of pain. You quip under your breath, Saint Spike, patron of awkward coffin selfies. The corner of your mouth twitches upward, though it feels a bit too self-aware. Given the setting, you step back, letting the Maiden dominate your view. Its lid gapes open like a hungry beast, waiting for the next curious soul. You circle to its rear, tracing the ribbed braces that hold its two halves rigid. Even if no one ever endured this device in medieval times, its image fueled countless nightmares. Medieval pamphlets later referenced Englischer Sarg, the English coffinant, another supposed variant that scholars believe was pure fabrication. Yet the legend persists, cropping up in modern horror films and escape room themes. It's strange how a probable 19th century hoax overshadows genuine medieval instruments like the rack or the wheel, both of which left unambiguous scars on the historical record. A soft gust stirs your torch's flame, casting spike-shaped shadows dancing across the walls. You take a slow breath, feeling the Maiden's cold presence in your chest. You find yourself whispering a half-joke. Note to self, never trust anything labeled antique medieval. The darkness seems to draw closer, and you realize it's time to move on before the room's atmosphere convinces you that shiftless spirits might lean in to say hello with one last look. You twist the Iron Maiden's lid shut. The lock clicks into place, the sound sharp and final. You run your hand along its smooth side, feeling the chill of solid metal. Then you step away, your torchlight bobbing as you head for the next passage. Behind you, the Maiden waits in silent vigil, its spikes concealed, its legends secure in iron and rumor. You step into a low-ceilinged alcove, the torchlight casting long shadows that dance across rough stone walls. The air here smells of cold iron and a faint trace of oil, as if someone tried to keep the metal parts moving smoothly despite the rust. On a sturdy wooden table, laid out like tools for an artisan rather than instruments of torture, sits the thumbscrew, two heavy C-shaped iron bars fitted with a central screw and wooden handle. Your fingers hover just above it, and you can almost feel the device's silent promise. A slow squeeze that crushes bone with the precision of a craftsman gone rogue. Your steps echo on the flagstones as you crouch to study the thumbscrew. The bars are grooved on the inside, meant to grip flesh without slipping, while the screw's threads are polished smooth from centuries of turning. A chill runs up your spine when you imagine that handle in the hands of a medieval torturer, each slow rotation sending shockwaves of pain through a prisoner's fingers. You press your thumb lightly against one grooved surface, cold, hard, and unforgiving. It reminds you of the rack's ratchet teeth or the sweetly lethal point of the Judas cradle. Each device mastered a different kind of agony. Medieval court records show thumbscrews used extensively by Spanish inquisitors in the late 15th century to extract confessions from suspected heretics and blasphemers. Official logs note they favored the smaller finger press models for secret interrogations, leaving no obvious marks once the ordeal was over. In England, Henry VIII's Privy Council employed thumbscrews during the 1530s to press information out of political rivals. These mainstream accounts underscore how versatile and discreet the device could be, slipping under the radar of both public outrage and local sheriffs. Leaning closer, smell a faint hint of almond likely from the Oil dripped onto the screw mechanism to ease the turning. A fringe anecdote claims that some medieval manicurists borrowed thumbscrews to shape a noble's cuticles, offering torture and beauty packages in the same salon. Apparently, a 17th century barber in Paris advertised finger-shrinking demonstrations alongside beard trims. You have to grin at the absurdity. Imagine ladies sipping tea while their digits are methodically crushed into perfect shape. Historians still argue whether this gruesome multitasking ever truly existed, or if it's just gossip spun by anti-Barbers Guild pamphlets. You rotate the handle a fraction, testing how smoothly the screw turns. The mechanism glides eerily. Easily, almost too well maintained for something meant to torture. You tap the device with your knuckles. The iron rings with a metallic ping that echoes longer than expected. Your mind flashes back to the racks, hollow creaks, and the cradle's coffin hinge. These sounds are the lullabies of a darker era. You crack a soft joke. If only we had YouTube reviews back then. Great pressure, but the warranties questionable. A narrow groove in the table's surface catches your eye. It runs beneath the thumbscrew, likely carved to catch crumbs of bone or flecks of nail as they chipped away. You imagine those tiny fragments sprinkling down like macabre confetti, each one a reminder of frailty and fear. A sudden draft stirs. Your torches flame, making the shadows jitter. It feels as though the device itself is leaning closer, eager for your next move. You step back, heart fluttering, and remind yourself humor is your shield, your small rebellion against the darkness. The table holds other implements. 2 slender pliers, curved shears, and a vial of what appears to be crushed walnut shells. According to one mainstream manual on interrogation dated 1523, scraped walnut shells were rubbed into wounds to heighten pain on abrasive grit that gnawed at exposed flesh. The combination of crushing and grinding meant that survivors carried permanent reminders of their ordeal. You tentatively pick up the shears, noting how they align almost perfectly with the thumbscrew's jaw synergy of tools. It's designed for maximum torment. Your gaze drifts to a narrow slit in the far wall, channeling a beam of moonlight onto the device. The light highlights faint tool marks along the screw's shaft, evidence that medieval craftsmen filed the threads by hand, ensuring a custom fit for each torture chamber. It's an unsettling blend of dedication and cruelty. You imagine the workshop where these instruments were forged, hammers ringing, embers glowing, and artisans shaping evil into functional art. A half-serious thought nags at you. This would get 5 stars for craftsmanship, 0 for ethics. You set the shears down and gesture toward the thumbscrew with a wry grin. Step right up. Get your manicure, you whisper, voice low so the walls don't overhear. Behind you, the corridor's gloom presses in, urging you to move on before fascination turns to fixation. Yet you linger a moment longer, running a fingertip along the screw's coarse threads. Each ridge feels like a testament to tortured confessions, forced truth wrung out one pinch at a time. Records mention a smaller variant called the finger vise, used by German authorities in the early 16th century to interrogate coin forgers. Prisoners were warned that just a few turns would shatter nail beds, but the threat often proved enough to secure a confession without fully tightening the grip. Some fringe stories describe victims selling fake nails afterward, claiming the vice had given them supernatural toughness. You chuckle, who knew medieval promotional swag could be so morbid? Historians still argue whether thumbscrews were primarily tools of extraction or theatrical props meant to intimidate crowds without actual use. In many cases, the mere sight of the device triggered confessions before a single turn of the screw. You step back and imagine a dimly lit chamber lined with witnesses. The torturer raises the handle, and the captive pleads before it even touches flesh. It's psychological warfare at its most subtle, pain by suggestion. You rise, easing the tension in your own fingers. The thumbscrew rests silently on the table, its jaws parted like a waiting trap. You brush away an imaginary dust mote, feeling the metal's cool weight under your palm. A sarcastic note tricks you into smiling. Nail salon of doom, now open. For business. Then you shake off the levity and tuck that thought away. It's mindful of the gravity behind it. One final look reveals a carved inscription at the table's edge. Testamentum Manuona. Followed by a date too faded to read. Whether this was the signature of a torturer proud of his handiwork, or a mark left by a survivor mocking his tormentor. You can't tell. What matters is that someone cared enough to leave a trace of human touch in a chamber designed to strip humanity away. You touch the carving gently, feeling the stone's uneven texture under your finger. With a deep breath, you step away from the table and back into the corridor. Your torch flickers, and for a moment, the thumbscrew's jagged silhouette looms behind you. 3 jokes, 2 anecdotes, 1 debate, all stored in memory, like bookmarks for nightmares. You straighten your shoulders, torch in hand, and continue. Onward toward the next room, where more secrets and horrors await. You push through a narrow archway and enter a circular chamber whose walls curve inward. It's muffling your footsteps to a soft whisper. It's a thick layer of sawdust and shattered bone dust carpets the stone floor. It's giving your boots a stealthy whisper as you approach the dais at the center. There stands the breaking wheel, a massive wooden circle, its rim reinforced with iron bands, spokes jutting like the ribs of some colossal, defunct sea creature. Chains and manacles hang from iron hooks around its edge, each one meant to secure. A limb before that limb met the spinning wrath of wood and steel. Your torchlight dances off the wheel's grim silhouette, illuminating deep grooves carved into the spokes, evidence of repeated impact from blunt clubs or cudgels. The air is thick with the tang of damp wood and old oxidized metal. You inhale, tasting a faint undertone of copper and dust, a sensory detail that sends a shiver down your spine. Fragments of tattered fabric cling to one spoke, perhaps remnants of a shroud or the ragged sleeve of a condemned man. You can almost sense the echo of shouts and the sickening crack of bones splintering against iron. Mainstream records show that the breaking wheel was in use across Europe from the 14th century until the late 18th century, especially in France and Germany, where it served as a condemnation for murderers and traitors. Some jurisdictions even reserved a special Catherine wheel for female criminals, named after Saint Catherine of Alexandria, who, legend says, was to be executed on a similar device but miraculously broke it herself before beheading. Fact. You imagine the spectacle, crowds roaring in approval, torches flickering under a blood-red sky. The condemned tied with limbs splayed like human starbursts, yet whispers in dusty. Archives suggest a fringe origin story, that the first breaking wheel was nothing more than a repurposed carpenter's wheel from a traveling carnival. Supposedly, a disgruntled jester angry at poor tips tied a local heckler to the wagon wheel after a feast and spun him around until the man begged for mercy. The carnival boss reportedly found the business venture so profitable that he sold the idea to local magistrates, who formalized it into law. Historians still argue whether this tale holds any credence or if it's simply medieval tabloid fodder. Born from tavern gossip rather than court records, you step closer, your torch casting long, flickering shadows that turn the wheel's spokes, and 2 skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare you. The iron rim is pitted with rust, but patches of smooth metal glint where ropes or chains once rubbed. You trace a rusty iron hook with your fingertip, imagining the moment when a prisoner's wrist would be locked fast. One light joke drifts through your mind. If they'd had spin classes back then, they'd call this bone-breaking boot camp. You shake off the idea humor is helpful. Don't want to laugh at this wheel's deadly efficiency. 2. You're right. set against the wall, lie a collection of blunt instruments, maces, hammers, and hefty wooden clubs. An ivory-handled mallet catches your eye. Its polished head looks almost ceremonial. Official manuals from the Holy Roman Empire stipulate that executioners should strike with controlled precision, delivering blows to major bones but avoiding immediate death, so that the victim's agony would last long enough to satisfy justice and spectators. You pick up the mallet, weighing it in your hand. It's surprisingly heavy, balanced as if crafted by a skilled blacksmith who took pride in both form and function. A distant wind rattles a barred window high above, making your torch sputter. You glance upward, reminded of the arrow slit in the first chamber and the narrow openings that offered prisoners fleeting glances of the world they lost forever. The breaking wheels room was sometimes built beneath a tower, linking execution to the highest point of the Casella perverse. Inversion of being raised aloft to spectacle. Some records indicate that condemned criminals were wheeled upward on scaffolds before the final spin, making them as visible as church bells to the surrounding village. You set the mallet down and circle back to the wheel's front. A carved inscription along the beam reads Anno Domini 1567. The date aligns with a period of intense peasant uprisings in Brittany. After one revolt was crushed and leaders sentenced to public dismemberment, a fringe scholar claims that some of the peasants managed to free themselves mid-execution and flee into the woods, leaving the wheel abandoned and cracked. Historians still argue whether that tale reflects a real act of rebellion or is a simple folk legend meant to undermine authority. Your torchlight catches. It's a shallow trough around the wheel's base, meant to catch bone splinters and blood. You lean down, brushing a finger along the trough's smooth curve, scanning for fragments. Tiny white flecks sparkle like grim snow amid the sawdust. Another light joke crosses your lips. Talk about fall cleanup. This must be a nightmare on Earth Day. Even as you smile, the gravity of shattered bodies beneath your fingertip tugs at something deeper, reminding you why these devices left such a mark on history. Above the wheel, ornamental carvings run along the chamber's arch, stylized suns, gears, and broken chains, symbolizing the cycle of sin and punishment. Some medieval theologians saw the breaking wheel as the physical embodiment of the wheel of fortune, turning virtue into vice and vice into ruin. They held sermons between sessions, urging sinners to repent, lest they spin on this iron stage themselves. You shiver at the thought of the preaching's lullaby, cadence turning into the sickening rhythm of hammer on bone. You rise and notice a third of the Katy Dell. You rise and notice a third of the wall, creating an uneven surface designed to concentrate force on specific limbs. Executioners could choose which bones to break first, controlling pain and prolonging life for maximum effect. Some experts point out that the design evolved over centuries, peaking in complexity by the 17th century, though historians still argue whether its most brutal innovations occurred earlier or later in its lifespan. A gentle draft swirls dust motes in golden arcs as your torchlight skitters across the chamber. You sweep your gaze over the wheel one last time. The memory of the rack's wrenching pull and the cradle's slow descent whispering in your mind. They all share a common thread: domination of the body to break the will. Yet the breaking wheel stands apart, a rotating monument to public spectacle. Turning pain into performance, you step away, your reflection shimmering in a shallow puddle of pooled water by the doorway. For a heartbeat, you imagine yourself strapped to that wheel, the world spinning blur behind you as ropes tighten on flesh. A final, half-joking thought emerges. So that's the original spin cycle, no fabric softener included. You shake your head to clear the darkness, then lift your torch and venture forward. leaving the wheels silent testament to cruelty behind. You step through a narrow archway into a low-ceilinged atrium brightened by shafts of pale daylight filtering through barred windows. The noise of clinking chains and distant echoes dims, replaced by the rasp of shuffling feet and the murmur of curious onlookers beyond the door. Before you stand two wooden benches fixed to the stone floor, the stocks, a pair of knee-high holes framed by stout beams, and the pillory, a waist-high board pierced with 3 holes to lock head and hands. The air here smells of aged oak and spilled ale, with a faint tang of sweat and hay from a makeshift viewing platform. Someone once shoved against the far wall. You approach the stocks first. Ropes and iron hinges glint where the 2 planks meet, grooved smooth by centuries of use. A small plaque, likely a later edition, Blair's property of the Borough of Winchester. Circa 1296, a mainstream record of English town statutes that mandated stocks for minor offenses such as drunkenness, petty theft, and insulting the village priest. Local bylaws required stocks to stand in the marketplace, where passers-by could jeer and pelt offenders with rotten vegetables and mud. You run a finger along the rounded edge of one hole, recalling the Judas Cradle's spike, tracing the same curve in your nightmares. I guess medieval towns took their open mic comedies seriously, muse. A fringe tail etched into the back beam catches your eye. Legend says, a clever tinkerer once rigged a rotating mechanism under the stocks so that every time someone threw a rotten tomato, their feet spun around like carnival ducks. You let out a soft laugh at the Imogen unwilling wheel of shame with its prisoner on perpetual spin cycle. Historians still argue whether this rotating stocks ever existed or if it's a prank story told to shame miscreants into staying home. Either way, it's a reminder that medieval mischief could be surprisingly creative. You move toward the pillory. The board surface is scarred with chisel marks, and veins of dark resin seep from ancient repairs. Holes are roughly aligned. The center one large enough for a head with room to pant and plead, flanked by narrower openings for wrists. Mainstream accounts note that pillories were especially popular from the 14th through 17th centuries across Europe and colonial America, used for gossipers, perjurers, and adulterers, the social media influencers of their day. Imagine a medieval Reddit post, just saw old man Becker in the pillory for slander. Hashtag cancel culture. You snort softly, picturing hashtags carved into the wood. A quirky footnote whispers from an old tavern pamphlet. Some villagers claimed cats loved to claw at the pillory's wood, sharpening their claws on the edges and leaving behind tufts of fur as unwanted souvenirs. You suppress a grin. Feline graffiti must have made the torture bench extra uncomfortable. If you brush a few wispy strands stuck in a crack, they feel silky and out of place amid the rough grain. Historians still argue whether cats were nuisances in such public settings or simply became part of the scenery, tolerated by spectators chasing rodents away. Your torchlight sweeps along the stone floor, highlighting faint stains that radiate out from the stocks and pillory long dried blood and weeping wood resin. You almost hear the echo of laughter and jeers, the smack of boots, the thwack of rotten fruits striking an exposed face. You imagine a week's worth of punishments for a single offender, each day dragging through humiliation instead of death. It's a slow burn of shame that might hurt more than a swift axe. A soft joke drifts through your mind. Medieval public relations team would be proud to talk about brand awareness. Looking up, you spot a narrow arrow slit above the pillory, identical to the one you saw in the rack chamber. Sunlight streams in, highlighting dust motes drifting like lost spirits. That same breeze once carried the stink of fresh torment. Now it carries birdsong from a courtyard beyond. You remember the distant crow of a rooster in the torture hallway, and the salty taste of tears mixed with groundstone. The contrast makes you wonder if medieval hoodlums envied their friends outside or dreaded the anonymity of darkness more. You kneel beside the stocks, examining the locking mechanism. A heavy iron clasp slides over a wooden dowel, securing ankles in place with an audible thud. A carved inscription alongside reads De la Manche, 1342. Perhaps the craftsman's mark or the name of the first victim bound there. A fringe. Rumor claims the craftsman was a disgraced baker who used leftover bread dough to test the fit of stock holes before glazing the planks with varnish. You bite your lip to keep from laughing. Dough and punishment isn't exactly your dream bakery concept. Rising. You circle to the pillory, where an engraved motto reads Audi altrum partem, Latin for, "Hear the other side." Ironically, the pillory allowed the public to hear the offender's pleas while stifling any rebuttal. You press your cheek lightly against the smooth wood, feeling its heat under your torch. The grain is worn flat, the surface polished by countless faces pressed against it. You can almost feel the hush before a crowd's roar, the brief second between revelation and retaliation. A narrow channel around the pillory's base catches any fluids and debris, much like the trough under the rack you passed earlier. That continuous drip of humiliation become a torment unto itself. You recall the water torture pit and nearly smile from shame to waterboarding. Medieval tourism had all the attractions. You step back and crack a gentler joke. Think twice before signing up for the village fair. A buzzer-quiet wind rattles the bars overhead, as if the building itself sighs at the cruelty it has harbored. You glance at the stocks again, imagining footsteps of the guard placing a chain around the prisoner's thighs, adjusting the wood blocks for a snug fit. Some legal codes required the pillory be erected outside a schoolhouse on a Sunday, ensuring scholars would witness the humbling spectacle alongside farmers, an early form of communal accountability. Historians still argue whether these moral lessons ever deterred crime or simply became popular entertainment. You lean forward, brushing dust from the pillory board, and whisper a half-joke, half-lament, better than reality TV, though a bit less sanitary. The wood feels warm, as if it still bears the heat of a face plastered to it. You lift your torch to study a tiny carving at its base, a heart pierced by an arrow, initials beneath. A prisoner once carved it, while waiting for release, or perhaps resigned to more torment. You press your fingertip to the carving, tracing its lines and feeling the uneven stone beneath. Standing. You let your gaze drift between the stocks and the pillory. Both devices share a purpose, turning shame into a weapon, wielded by law and laughter alike. Yet, while the rack and wheel broke bodies, these broke spirits. You imagine how it felt for a petty thief to endure public scorn day after day, until the memory of freedom seemed a distant dream. A third joke dances on your lips. At least they couldn't cancel Wi-Fi back then, silver linings. You step away from the benches and head toward a narrow corridor at the chamber's edge. Behind you, the stocks and pillory remain silent. Sentinels of shame, their beams fixing in place the stories of humiliation that once echoed here. You pause at the threshold, taking one last look at the worn wood, the iron clasps, and the fading graffiti. Then you turn to continue onward into the twisting passages where newer, stranger devices await. You slide open a narrow door into a low-lit chamber where the air feels oddly suffocating, as if the walls themselves are leaning in to watch. The scent of damp stone mingles with a faint tang of oil and sweat, a sensory duet that makes you shift. On your feet, at the center rests a curious contraption. Two curved iron bars joined by a hinge at one end, forming a V shape when closed. Leather straps and tightening screws line each limb of the V, and when clamped, they force thighs or sometimes arms together in excruciating compression. This is the scavenger's daughter, and standing before it, you can practically feel your legs squeeze shut at the memory of its metal grip. You step closer, squinting to take in the device's details. One bar is dotted with screw clamps, the other studded with small iron teeth. The interior surfaces are worn smooth from contact, while the edges remain jagged, as though meant to bite into flesh. A modern thought flits through your mind. Brace yourself, this is like leg day at the worst gym ever. You stifle a grin. Humor is your lifeline here, a buoy in a sea of horrors. Mainstream historians credit Sir Leonard Skevington, Lieutenant of the Tower of London, with the invention of the scavenger's daughter around 1581 under order of Henry VIII. Official tower. Records describe it as a gruesome engine designed to compress the body rather than stretch it, twisted counterpart to the rack's elongating cruelty. It first appeared in English royal inventories in 1601. Though its use may have begun earlier with Skevington's unauthorized experiments on suspected traders. The device earned its name in later centuries when antiquarians misread the original moniker Skevington's daughter and turned it into something more ominous. Yet a fringe theory suggests the real blueprint for this compression machine came from obscure hunting traps used to immobilize boars and deer. According to some dusty lore, Skevington observed a boar trap that squeezed its catch's hindquarters, and he repurposed the same principle for human torment. The idea of turning animal snares into instruments of state-sanctioned pain feels almost poetic, like nature and cruelty collaborating in lockstep. Historians still argue whether these hunting implements truly inspired the design, or if that's just a backstory dreamed up by later storytellers seeking added drama. You crouch to examine the hinge mechanism. A central pivot pin holds the two bars together, and a small lever with ratchet teeth locks them at various widths. Your torchlight catches the sheen of oil on the ratchet's nuts. Someone took care to keep the movement slick, as though they planned on squeezing dozens of limbs without pause. If you imagine the sound of that ratchet clicking shut, the final click, echoing like a verdict. Guilty. A stray joke forms on your lips. Talk about the ultimate leg press, no gym membership required. Your boots clack on the stone floor as you circle the machine, the chamber's gloom pressing in. You spot worn leather pads at the clamps, likely meant to cushion but only slightly the teeth that dug into flesh. A faint residue of dried blood still clings to one pad, a muted testament to victims who shrieked here. You press a fingertip to the leather. It's hard and cracked. You sniff it, catching an acrid whiff of iron and old lye. Torture never goes out of style when it smells this fresh. A light draft stirs the torch's flame, making shadows slither across the walls. In those flickering silhouettes, the bars look more like scissors set to slice through stone. Do you imagine being yoked into its jaws? It starts loose, offering false hope, then slowly clamps down, pressing muscle and vein until the prisoner tries to squeeze out a confession just to escape the agony. Mainstream accounts mention that after a few minutes of compression, victims often begged to speak truth, even if they had none to give. Under such pressure, lies sounded like salvation. You run your hand along one bar's grooved surface, feeling the ridges worn smooth by rope fibers and dripping fluids. It reminds you of the rack's ratchet teeth and the Judas cradle's spindle leech groove in history carved in pain and panic. You crack a soft joke. Move over. Thighmaster, this workout has a hard, no pain, no gain policy. Darkness seems to swallow the humor instantly, as if the chamber itself recoils. Near the hinge, you notice a shallow channel etched into the stone floor. It matches the device's base, meant to catch anything expelled during compression: blood, sweat, tears, or worse. You kneel and peer inside, spotting rusty flakes and flecks of leather. It's a grim mosaic, a souvenir of desperation. A fringe anecdote claims that some inquisitors sprinkled salt or broken glass along this channel to punish prisoners who crawled free. You press your torch closer, as if seeking proof, but all you see is shadow and residue. You stand and sweep your light upward to spot a narrow arrow slit high on the wall. Through it, you glimpse a sliver of sky and hear distant crows. That same crack in the masonry served as a twisted promise. Freedom was so close, yet forever out of reach. You recall the moonlit flicker in the rack chamber and the fearful glimpse at the lash Judas Cradle's pit continuity that ties each device to this tangled network of torment. On a low bench nearby, you see a set of small, detachable clamps, shaped like miniature versions of the machine, likely used on wrists or ankles. A leather-bound inventory ledger lies open beside them, listing sizes and add-on accessories for different body parts. Child set, gentlewoman's edition, and chillingly, peasant default. The notion that torture chambers had upsell options sends a shiver through you. You lift the ledger, leaf through brittle pages, and spot a cheeky margin note. 2 peasants for price of 1. A ghost of a grin flickers. Medieval Groupon deals. Anyone? You close the book and return your gaze to the scavenger's daughter. The V-shape, at first seeming simple, now feels like the jaws of some ancient predator. Under its metal teeth, you sense the promise of ruined ligaments severed, bones splintered, will crushed before the voice broke. It's intimacy in cruelty, a face-to-face confrontation of flesh and steel. Yet you remember the rack's linear agony and the wheel's spinning dismemberment. Each device mastered a unique choreography of torture. A scholar's debate echoes in your thoughts. Historians still argue whether the scavenger's daughter ever saw widespread use, or if it remained an experimental oddity in the tower's dusty corners. Few court records mention it, and many devices seized by invaders were destroyed without mention. Was it sidelined for its impracticality, or hidden for its secretive delight? You brush a hand over the hinge, its cold touch whispering possibilities. You take a final step back, letting the chamber's hush wrap around you. A final joke slips out, and today's medieval hack always read the appliance manual before use. The scavenger's daughter remains silent, its ratchet lever poised in the half-open position, a paused threat waiting for flesh. It's time to move on. You extinguish your torch against the wall, snap it shut, and step away. Your boots echo as you exit into the corridor, carrying the memory of compressive cruelty into the next twisting passage. You push open a narrow, squeaking door and step into a dimly lit chamber where the air feels thick with anticipation. A single torch flickers against rough-hewn stone walls, casting dancing shadows that stretch and shrink like anxious spectators. In the center rests the pear of anguish, a steel fruit split into 4 or 5 lobes sprouting from a central hinge. Its petals held tightly closed by a slender screw at the stem. As you approach, the metal shines dully in the soft glow. Each lobe curved and smooth, deceptively innocent, like some perverse botanical sculpture. Your footsteps echo on cold flagstones as you crouch beside the device. You can practically feel the cherry blossom scent they never added. Though your nose catches only the metallic temps of old iron and the faint musk of leather straps thrown aside, fingers graze the screw's curled head. The ridges are worn but still sharp enough to promise a sudden, wrenching twist. A whisper in your mind quips, "Talk about pear-shaped torture," and you stifle a soft chuckle, mindful that laughter is your comforting shield here. Mainstream parish court records from late 16th century France describe a similar instrument, used against blasphemers, accusing them of heresy before prying apart imprisoned flesh. The device appears once in an inventory of the Toulouse Inquisitorial Archives dated 1583. where it's listed under instrumentum infernalis, a name that leaves no room for understatement. Confessions extracted with such gadgets were notoriously unreliable, since victims would say anything to stop the slow expansion. Historians still argue whether those testimonies refer to the very pair on display here, or to a primitive corkscrew-like device meant more for humiliation than actual flesh-splitting. You rise and circle to inspect the lobes up close. The inner surfaces are polished smooth, mistaken by many for comfort, but those same curves are designed to catch and separate soft tissues. A draft stirs your torch's flame, making the steel petals gleam like moonlit waves. In your head, you hear an over-enthusiastic whine sommelier. This one opens gently, revealing deep notes of agony and despair. You grin at your own joke, leaning in to imagine the first torturer's sales pitch, guaranteed to extract truths you didn't even know you held. A fringe anecdote passed down in scribbled margin notes of a 19th century curiosity catalog claims the pear was originally modeled after a real fruit a priest found suspiciously large. According to the tale, Father Benut brought a pear so enormous to his parish in 1575 that he declared it a demon's fruit. An anonymous artisan supposedly crafted the metal version in mockery, intending it as a parody, only for inquisitors to adopt it genuinely. You almost snort at the image of a devoted clergyman lecturing his flock about demonic horticulture. Historians still argue whether that story reflects any kernel of truth or is simply a juicy bit of folklore. Created to distract from darker realities, you run a finger along the edges where the lobes meet, noting tiny ridges that would catch on. Fabric and skin alike. It feels almost wrong to admire the workmanship, but you can't deny the craftsmanship. The screw mechanism at the stem threads smoothly, though it requires effort to turn, suggesting that torturers wanted deliberate, controlled expansion. You lift the device slightly, feeling its weight in your hand, heavy enough to promise serious damage but balanced so it could be cranked open with a single-handed twist. A soft melody drifts through your thoughts, a lullaby you'd rather not. Remember, rhythmic and slow, matching the deliberate creak of metal on metal. You place the pear back on its stone plinth and step around to a shallow channel at its base, carved to catch any fluids released during use. The channel is etched deeply into the stone, stained a rusty brown at the bottom of a dents that at least once this pear was closed on flesh. A joking thought glimmers. Truly the apple lore pear of discord. And you bite your lip to hold back a grin. You press your palm against the cold stone nearby, steadying yourself. The chamber's hush feels alive, as if the walls themselves hold their breath. In one corner, a faded stencil shows a crude drawing of a face that looks eerily like it's screaming in grim acceptance. Behind it, someone scrawled a name and date. Louise B. 1591. You imagine Louise bound and hooded, her hands turned inward, innocence or guilt forgotten as the first twist began. The name clings to you like dew on morning grass. Lean as you might, the pear's symmetrical curves remain unbroken. No chips on its edges, no scars marring its petals. That polish suggests it was cared for, oiled, brushed, clean, ready for display or demonstration. You sniff the air, catching a faint whiff of olive oil, perhaps used to lubricate the screw, or a leftover scent from the priest's lamp. You pause, to wonder if medieval artisans traded secret recipes for metal care alongside their torture engineering tips. The blend of brutality and domesticity feels surreal. Your eyes drift upward to the arrow slit near the ceiling, where a sliver of pale sky is visible. Morning light filters through, bringing a cruel irony. Daylight meant deliverance outside these walls, yet inside, it just highlights instruments of suffering. You recall the first chamber's honey-coated walls and the rack's saltwater ropes. Each device left its own sensory signature. Here, it's a subtle echo of oil and metal. It's an olfactory haunt that lingers long after you leave. You settle into a low crouch, running fingertips along the screw's thread. Each ridge kicks up a small puff of ancient dust. You imagine the tactile sensation of skin caught between those lobes, the moment before flesh separates and nerves scream. A softer joke drifts in. Harvest season must have been brutal. Even the pun feels brittle in the hushed scraps of parchment lie nearby. One inscribed with a hastily drawn diagram labeled Falm de Pour. The script is shaky, as if drawn by a prisoner too weak to steady his hand. You pick up the paper gently, cradling its fragile fibers. The edges are singed, and ink blurs where tears once fell. On the back, a note reads, "Turn until you see God." The phrase sends a chill through you, whether written by torturer or victim. It reveals both dread and dark humor, and ancient scholars debate echoes. Historians still argue whether the pair's primary use was for interrogation or punishment. Some insist it was more of a demonstration piece, wielded in front of crowds to intimidate without inflicting full expansion. Others believe isolated survivors recounted it as fact, though no one surviving all petals fully opened remained to tell the tale. The device's scarcity in court inventories suggests it may have been less common than other torture tools, yet its legend eclipsed many more prevalent instruments. You replace the parchment and stand, torchlight flickering across the pears. Polished silhouette. The chamber feels suddenly claustrophobic, as though the pear itself leans in, ready to bloom. You whisper, "Thanks, but I'll stick to real fruit," then gingerly back away, your boots echoing on the stone floor. A final joke flares to life. Note to self, never buy the deluxe torture toolkit. Before exiting, you run your gaze over the pear one last time. The metal petals gleam with silent promise, and you sense the weight of both fact and fiction, wrapped in its curves. As the corridor yawns ahead, you turn your back on the pear of anguish, stepping out into relative freedom. Your heart still ticking to the rhythm of that slow, deliberate twist. You step into a narrow chamber where the air feels strangely warm, as if the stones have absorbed the heat of 1,000 torches. The walls are slick with dampness and the faint smell of scorched leather, a sensory echo of past cruelties. For you hangs a peculiar iron contraption, wrought into the shape of a small, clawed crescent. 2 scissor-like handles jut from either end, each fitted with a ratcheting screw that controls a pair of serrated blades. This is the breast ripper, and it sits here like a grim surgeon's tool, promising agony measured in increments of flesh as you approach. Your torchlight glances off the curved claws, revealing jagged teeth designed not to cut smoothly, but to tear and wrench. The handles are wrapped in frayed leather, slick with dark stains you'd rather not identify. You imagine gripping those handles, your fingers sliding against damp leather as you squeeze the blades closed against soft tissue. The thought alone sends a shiver through your spine. A light joke tickles your mind. Talk about bad dental work, this one's 4 root canals of a different kind. You suppress the grin, knowing humor here is both a comfort and a lifeline. Mainstream records note that the breast ripper, also known as the iron spider, appeared in 16th century Nuremberg and Heidelberg. Used primarily to punish women accused of adultery or witchcraft. Official trial transcripts from the Holy Roman Empire mention sentencing convicted adulteresses to have their breasts ripped with red-hot pincers in public markets, an act meant to humiliate and deter others. The device's design is said to reflect the era's brutal belief that female transgressions warranted mutilation to match perceived moral corruption. Historians still argue whether it was legal torture under imperial law or a sadistic innovation carried out by rogue executioners in the absence of formal sanction. You crouch to inspect the device's hinge mechanism. A slender spindle runs through the center, connecting the handles with a series of interlocking rings. Each ring bears fine engravings, tiny crosses, floral motifs, and even initials IH carved by the artisan. You trace your fingertip along one of these carvings, feeling the cold ridges beneath your nail. A fringe anecdote suggests that some executioners painted the blades with red ochre to simulate rust, giving mourners the impression of centuries-old cruelty. According to the tale, this cosmetic touch boosted attendance at public punishments as people craved authentic horror. You almost snort at the image of medieval marketers touting 100% genuine torture experience. Your boots echo on the flagstones as you circle the breast ripper, studying every angle. The walls here lean inward, forcing you closer to the device's hungry claws. A modern aside slides into your thoughts. Imagine this showing up on Instagram, hashtag no filter, hashtag Mleek Beauty. You stifle the laugh, mindful that in medieval times, public punishments were the equivalent of viral videos, drawing crowds hungry for spectacle. You rise and examine the padded grips. The leather is weathered, stiff, and cracked, yet it still bears the imprint of countless hands turning the ratchet screw. You turn it gently, testing the mechanism. Each click of the screw tightens the blades, bringing them closer together with merciless precision. The slow tightening builds anticipation. Terror, you whisper, no pain, no gain, right? And immediately wince at your own sarcasm. A faint draft stirs the torch's flame, causing shadows to leap across the device's silhouette. In that flicker, the blades look like the pincers of some iron crab lurking in the dark. You step back, heart pounding, and notice a narrow trough cut into the floor beneath the rippers. It's stained a dark brown, almost black, a testament to the fluid its designers expected to collect. You imagine the first victim standing here, robes torn away, chests exposed, while a crowd jeered and shields were raised to catch drips. The mingled scents of blood, sweat, and horses likely filled the air. A sensory brew meant to heighten the horror. Near the rear wall, you spot a stool with leather straps mounted on its seat. It sits directly under the rippers, aligning the victim's torso with the blades. The straps are secured by iron buckles, each etched with tiny numerals, I, 2. 3, perhaps 2 mark sequential stages of increasing pain. Official inventories from 1585 list breast rippers and seats as a standard kit in southern German torture chambers. Though few devices survive today, historians still argue whether most executions actually employed the rippers or if the threat alone was enough to force confessions. You kneel and lift the edge of a faded cloth draped beside the stool. Beneath, you find a pair of tongs with curved ends, likely used to grasp skin, and pull it taut before the blades closed. The tongs feel surprisingly light in your hand, like an oversized cherry pitter. You let a soft joke slip out, dentist's pick or medieval pulling tool. You decide. The laugh comes easier this time. A small rebellion against the chamber's oppressive purpose, returning the tongs. You pressed your cheek against the cold stone floor, tilting your head upward so your torchlight grazes the rippers from below. The claw-like ends seem to leer down at you, and you imagine the breathless panic of someone caught beneath those jaws. A scholarly debate echoes in your mind, whether the breast ripper was ever used on men accused of lechery or political crimes, or if it remained strictly a gendered instrument of shame. Some fringe accounts claim a few heathen prisoners endured it limb by limb, though no official document supports such extreme variants. The silence on such cases speaks volumes about who Medieval justice deemed expendable. You sit back on your heels and take a steadying breath. The chamber's hush presses against your ears, broken only by the soft hiss of your own inhalation. You run a finger along one serrated blade. The uneven edge sends a jolt of revulsion through you. It reminds you of the spikes on the Iron Maiden, though those were meant to contain rather than precisely tear. Each device you've seen carves out a different brand of terror, stretching, crushing, spinning, and now ripping. The variety staggers you. A grim testament to human invention when unbound by compassion. Lifting yourself, you catch sight of a faint inscription carved into the wall behind the seat, Fardai Tugend. 1594, for virtue. A bitter irony. That the torture proclaimed itself purposeful, righteous even. You pressed your palm to the carving, feeling the uneven stone beneath your skin. You wonder if the artisan who carved it believed in that slogan or mocked it in secret. Either way, the phrase lingers like a curse in the cramped air. A noise glances through the corridor, outside musty wind, or perhaps your own echoing footsteps. You rise, torch in hand, and step away from the device. Your boots clack against the stone as you circle once more, committing every detail to memory. The grip of the handles, the curve of the blades, the scent of oil and decay. A final joke surfaces. Add this to your bucket list immediately after getting all your digits. You nearly laugh aloud, catching yourself just in time. With a deep breath, you turn and head for the archway, leaving the breast rippers' predatory claws behind. The chamber's warmth recedes as cooler air washes over you in the corridor. You glance back once, torchlight flickering against the serrated edges, then step forward. Ahead lies another door, promising fresh horrors and fresh stories to unravel. You ease through a soot-streaked doorway into a cavernous, furnace-lit chamber where the air shimmers with heat and the scent of hot metal. Before you stands the brazen bull, a gleaming hollow statue of a bull cast from bronze, its mouth agape, in a silent roar. The metal surface glows faintly in the torchlight, as though the chamber itself breathes fire. You wipe a bead of sweat from your brow and swallow hard, recalling the iron spikes of the maiden and the scorching clamp of the breast ripper. This device promises a different hell entirely. Stepping closer, you feel the tangible pulse of heat radiating from the bull's flanks. The floor beneath your boots is scorched in places, blackened by centuries of use, or at least by curious visitors who tested hot coals against the ground. A curious echo trickles through the chamber, faint creaks of aged bronze, as if the bull itself might flex its metal ribs. You run your hand along the bull's back, feeling the ridged pattern of its stylized hide, and note the patina smooth in some spots, pitted in others from oxidation and the caustic residue of sacrificial offerings. A stray thought pops up. If this were a barbecue pit, it'd be the world's cruelest rotisserie. You stifle a laugh. Humor is the only relief from this furnace of dread. Mainstream. Classical sources attribute the bull's creation to Parallels of Athens in the 6th century BCE, commissioned by the tyrant Phalaris, who legend cested its efficiency by roasting victims inside its belly as they screamed through the bull's nostrils. Reports claim Phalaris himself ordered the first live test, ironically perishing inside his own contraption when betrayers turned the bull's heat against him. Later, accounts place a version of the bull in 13th century Sicily under Federico II, suggesting that the hellish bronze device endured well into the medieval era. You imagine the crackle of firewood beneath, the metal growing white-hot, the tortured screams amplified by the bull's internal acoustics. An engine of agony refined across centuries. Yet fringe lore insists the original brazen bull was inspired by a wine vat so immense that vintners once trapped unruly workers inside to toughen them up before harvest season. According to this tale, the first roasts were accidental. A disgruntled laborer sealed inside lost more than his job. And subsequent vintners embraced the device's efficiency for creature comforts, until the aristocracy caught wind and weaponized it for judicial cruelty. Historians still argue whether that vintner versus prisoner anecdote holds any water, or if it's just a drunken myth born in coastal taverns. You crouch to examine the bull's broad chest plate, etched with delicate flourishes, arabesques, and floral motifs, suggesting a craftsman proud of his artistry even as he forged a torture engine. A thin seam runs along the belly, where two hemispherical sections of bronze were riveted together. The seam's edges are worn smooth, no doubt from repeated opening and closing. You find the latch hidden beneath a decorative ring, a simple lever that, when lifted, would allow the bull's head to tilt back and its belly to open. You tug it gently sturdy, with a satisfying click. In your mind's eye, you see the head pivoting, revealing a hollow interior hot enough to bake bread. In minutes. A half-serious joke surfaces: medieval pizza, a vendable pepperoni for your soul. As you stand, the torchlight flickers across the bull's hollow eyes, forging dark pools that seem to watch you with iron patience. The narrow nostrils, when heated, served as a gruesome megaphone, funneling victims' screams into the courtyard beyond for maximum terror. A small sardonic aside in your mind notes that it'd make a fantastic haunted house prop, scream amplifier 3000. Though you promptly shush yourself. This place isn't for thrills alone. Your gaze drifts down to the stone floor, where a circular trench encircles the bull's hooves. You kneel and press a fingertip into the trench's blackened stone, gritty with ash and flecks of charred wood. A shallow channel leads away toward a barred drain likely meant to funnel out sweat, blood, and any water poured in to stoke the flames. You imagine guards heaping coals into a fire pit here, feeding the heat while spectators crane their necks to glimpse the metal beast breathing red-hot death. A second joke flits by. All-you-can-eat buffet, but the entree is your insides. You rise and circle to the bull's rear, where an ornate plaque bears an inscription in Old Sicilian: Fortitudo et fides, strength and faith. The irony is brutal, virtue proclaimed on a vessel of cruelty. Beneath the motto, someone has roughly scratched the initials PP. And the date, 1224. A fringe story claims that when Frederick II outlawed the device in Sicily, he didn't destroy it but repurposed it as a communal bread oven for his court, promptly removed when guests balked at the smell. Historians still argue whether any version of the bull ever slid peacefully into domestic service, or if that too was a fanciful spin. You catch your reflection in the bull's gleaming flancure torch, and your face warped like a funhouse mirror, distorted by age and fear. You brush the bronze, feeling its heat even through your fingertips. A distant roar, or maybe just the building settling, makes you flinch. You whisper, if it could talk, it'd scream louder than its victims. The thought clings to your throat. Stepping back, you notice a set of iron tongs resting on a small anvil beside a firebox. Their tips are wide and curled, ideal for placing and retrieving coals or pulling bodies free when the show was over. You heft one tong, surprisingly light. A tool built for precision rather than brute force. A whimsical notion crosses your mind. Perfect for flipping steaks if only they sold grill accessories with this level of authenticity. You smile at the absurdity, then shudder as the heat washes over you again. Above the bull, a series of carved reliefs grace the archway, stylized flames, torches, and monstrous faces with gaping jaws. The icons echo the bull's design, reinforcing the spectacle of fire and pain as a ritual of power. You remember the carved suns over the breaking wheel and the floral arabesques on the breast ripper, symbols of sin and purification. Here, fire is both purifier and punisher. A duality medieval rulers exploited for maximum psychological effect. A sudden gust rattles the barred window high above, momentarily dimming your torch. For a heartbeat, you picture the bowl bursting into flame, embers raining down like malevolent fireworks. You clamp your torch tighter, awareness prickling your skin. You tell yourself to stay focused, observe, record, and keep joking just enough to stay sane. One final detail catches your eye: a bronze funnel fixed at the bull's back, leading down into its belly. Some scholars suggest it was for pouring water to create steam when temperatures peaked, perhaps. A half-hearted mercy to prevent victims from incinerating instantaneously. Others believe it was used to inject oil or pitch, intensifying the blaze. Historians still argue whether steam or sulfurous fumes were part of the executionist's toolkit. Adding layers of sensory horror, you inhale deeply, tasting the acrid sting of smoke and scorched earth. Your boots clack sharply on the floor as you back away. The bull's head seems to lower in your torchlight, as if granting you one last, silent warning. A final joke drifts into your mind. Guess it really is the calf of the century. You exhale a trembling laugh, though it feels hollow in the heat. Turning away, you step into the corridor's cooler embrace. Behind you, the brazen bull stands. In mute majesty, its belly empty now, but loaded with legend and dread. You catch a whiff of lingering heat on your clothes and wonder how long it'll follow you. With your torch flickering low, you walk on, leaving the furnace chamber and its smoky echoes behind. You squeeze through a narrow slit in the stone wall and enter a dim chamber where the air feels taut, as if even the silence is stretched by tensioned ropes. The room smells of damp hemp and cold iron, mingling into an aroma that clings to your nostrils like a stubborn rumor. Before you hangs the cat's paw. Two curved iron hooks mounted on a wooden beam, their barbs pointing inward like feline fangs. Beneath lies a coiled length of thick, knotted rope. As you step closer, the hook's cold steel glints in your torchlight, promising a slow, twisting pull that no rack could rival. Your boots thud softly on the straw-strewn floor. You brush a hand along the hook's barbed tip sharp enough to tear through linen and flesh, yet oddly elegant in their curve. A modern aside drifts through your thoughts. Imagine this on Amazon. 2-pack of clawed hooks. Now for your personal use. You stifle a grin, letting the humor buffer the dread. The cat's paw gained its name from the claw-like design, meant to grip muscles and tendons as torturers twisted victims toward confession. Mainstream sources note that by the late 15th century, inquisitors across Europe employed variants of this tool during interrogations of suspected thieves, prying answers with literal hooks and lies alike. A fringe tale insists the original inspiration for the cat's paw came not from bloodthirsty burghers, but from sailors who used hooked tools to haul hemp sails and stubborn barrels on deck. According to maritime lore, a ship's carpenter showed the design to a visiting inquisitor in a port city, and the curious official repurposed it for state business. You picture a bearded carpenter sipping grog, demonstrating pulley tricks while the torturer furiously takes notes. Historians still argue whether this nautical origin is genuine or just a seafarer's tall tale spun to save face when dockyards accidents occurred. You crouch to inspect the knotted rope beside the beam. Thick cords are tied at regular intervals, with overhand and figure-8 knots each intended to concentrate pressure at specific points on wrists or ankles. You pick up the rope, surprised at its weight. Coiling it around your palm, you feel the rough hemp fibers biting into your skin, like a silent warning. A soft joke flitters through your mind. Who knew rope could double as medieval IKEA furniture hardware? You cradle the knots, imagining them cinching down, each twist squeezing breath and blood from limbs as you stand. You trace your torchlight along a series of small rings mounted on the opposite wall. They hold varied lengths of rope, some braided, fine, others coarse and stiff as metal wire. You recognize one variant, the garrotelet, a short looped rope with a sliding knot used to strangle political prisoners in secret. Mainstream accounts from Spanish inquisitorial manuals circa 1520 describe its discreet use. Victims led blindfolded to an inner cell, where the garrotelet was slipped around their necks for a silent, suffocating end. The images are chilling, no spectacle, just a snap of rope and a muffled gasp. You breathe in the rope's musty temps, chalking it up to straw, sweat, and old dust. Your gaze drifts to carved sketches on the wall, crude depictions of hands bound by knots, wrists raised above heads while ropes snake across beams. One drawing shows a crouched figure wrapped in coils from neck to ankle, suspended like a macabre cocoon. Underneath, someone wrote in faded chalk, "Tried on porpoise, worked well." You blink, picturing an inquisitor testing rope tortures on sea creatures. Before humans. The absurdity breaks the tension for a moment. "I guess they wanted to avoid squeaky client reviews," you whisper, tapping your finger on the wall. Moving around the cat's paw, you spot a carved inscription at its base. Anno 1499, Meisberg. A mainstream decree from that year in the German city of Meissen banned unsanctioned rope tortures, mandating only certified torturers could apply the cat's paw. Yet peripheral records reveal continued secret use in nearby bishoprics, fueling rumors of midnight floggings and broken limbs. Historians still argue whether such bans truly curtailed abuses or simply shifted them, cussed into hidden corners of castle basements. You lift a coil of rope and examine its knots more closely. One knot forms a small loop you'd slip around a wrist. Another, larger and square, would pinch deep into skin under pressure. The torturer could pull from both ends, driving the knots into flesh and untying sinew from bone. In your hand, the rope feels almost alive, a writhing serpent waiting to coil. You cradle it against your chest for a half-second, shivering at the thought of its true purpose. A flicker of flame reveals a shallow trench around the cat's paw's beam, carved to catch droplets of blood and trickle them away. Q. Kneel. Fingers running along the groove's edge, feeling its rough cut. Someone scrawled a warning. "Mind your step, little mice," a jest at victims who tried to slip free during interrogation. You smirk at the macabre humor, but quickly tuck it away. The more you laugh, the closer you are to forgetting the room's true intent. You stand and circle the hooks once more. Each barb looks predatory, as if the beam itself longs to feast on tensioned flesh. You press your cheek against the cold wood, listening for echoes of past confessions wrung out under these hooks. It feels as if the walls themselves might whisper secrets, if only you leaned in harder. A voice inside reminds you, jokes are your shield, but respect for the suffering is your guide. A set of small iron winches lines one wall, gears and handles coated in dark grime. These winches powered a ratchet pole system that drew rope through pulleys above, raising victims off the ground. Mainstream references to suspension tortures in English records from the 14th century describe a method called the Spanish straitjacket, using knots and winches to lift and bind, sometimes until limbs dislocated under their own weight. You imagine being hoisted skyward, joints pulled beyond natural limits. Humorous riffs can't reach that level of agony. Above, a narrow slit high on the wall pings with moonlight. You recall seeing similar arrow slits in the rack chamber and the Iron Maiden room. They served as ventilation, but also as psychological torments letting prisoners glimpse the free world they'd lost. Here, rope shadows flicker on the slit's edges, promising both ascent and descent. You lick your lips, tasting hemp and regret. Near the winches, you discover a faded tapestry, depicting a monk with his arms tightly bound in rope, suspended upside down. The monk's face is serene, as though in prayer. A fringe anecdote claims this image commemorates a penitent who chose rope torture over execution, believing self-inflicted suffering would atone for his sins. Some local lore even maintained that the monk emerged purified, though no record shows his survival. Historians still argue whether penitential rope tortures were voluntary or forced impositions by ecclesiastical courts. You step back and stretch, flexing your wrists. The cat's paw's hooks seem to reach for your veins, ready to latch on. A final joke flits through. Worst tickle torture ever. You roll your shoulders, imagining how your humor shields you from despair. The torch flickers low, as if the chamber itself inhales with anticipation. Before you leave, you loop one end of the knotted rope around a nearby post, tugging gently. The knots tighten against the wood with a soft thwip, and you feel a pang of unease at how easily flesh might replace that beam. You unloop it quickly, setting the rope down as if you can absolve yourself by mere gesture. One last glance reveals a simple chalk tally on the wall. 24 marks crossed out, and 6 left, perhaps prisoners tormented here in a single month. The numbers feel heavy, each tally a broken person unwillingly bearing truth. You take a steadying breath, letting the chamber's tension ebb away from your chest, with a final nod to the cat's paws, iron fangs, and the knotted ropes silent threats. You turn toward the corridor. Your boots whisper against the straw, leaving no echo. Behind you, the hooks hang patient and poised. The ropes coil like resting serpents, and the walls keep their secrets. You step into the cool passage, carrying both the echoes of twisted cords and the crisp relief of moving forward. You step through a low archway into a chamber where the air feels unnaturally damp, as if the walls themselves weep. A single torch flickers by a stone basin at the far end, its golden light dancing on wet flagstones slick with moss and algae. You hear the steady drip-drip of water echoing in the gloom, each drop a metronome marking moments of dread. The basin sits beneath a crude pulley system. A rope dips into its murky depths, then rises to a hook on the ceiling. This is the heart of medieval water torture, an ancestor to modern waterboarding that relies on relentless immersion and sensory deluge sloshing forward. You inspect the basin. It's carved from a single block of limestone and stained dark from centuries of standing water and rust. A wide mouth allows a hooded prisoner's head to slip in, while straps at chest height secure arms and torso to a nearby post. You imagine being bound here, your mouth pressed to that chill stone rim, gasping for breath as cold water floods your face. A light joke swims through your mind. Who needs a spa when you can get the ultimate facial cleanse medieval edition? Mainstream interrogation manuals from the late 15th century, such as those used by the Spanish Inquisition, describe a technique called tortura aquiae insidia. The victim is seated, bound, and then repeatedly doused with water until panic sets. Official logs record its use in 1498 at Toledo, where suspected heretics endured hours of forced immersion before confessing to crimes they likely didn't commit. The combination of dread and disorientation broke resistance more reliably than many sharper instruments. Historians still argue whether this method was more widely applied than brutal flaying, or simply spread by rumor to instill fear. You run a fingertip along the basin's rim. The stone is slick with algae, slimy and cool. A fringe anecdote whispers that some torturers added crushed peppermint leaves to the water, claiming the sudden icy burn in lungs heightened terror, according to a surviving sketch in a 17th century Inquisitor's notebook. Victims described a rush of perfume followed by searing cold, as though inhaling mint and drowning simultaneously. You grimace, imagining minty fresh screams. A smirk crosses your face. Talk about mouthwash with a kick. Your torchlight catches the pulley above. You follow the hemp rope upward and see where it loops around a wheel, allowing torturers to lower a prisoner's head beneath the surface or hoist them partially out for breath. You press your palm to the rope's fibers, feeling them rough and damp, every strand a reminder of rope tortures past from the cat's paw to the scavenger's daughter. The continuity of cord and suffering ties these chambers together, each echoing the last's craftsmanship and cruelty. You pivot and notice a shallow trough carved into the floor around the basin. Greenish stains fanned out like algae blooms, and you crouch to peer inside. Tiny white flecks glimmer among silt fragments of clay pipes or bone, no one's sure which. A joking thought surfaces. At least the drainage system is top-notch. You bite your lip, restraining laughter. Humor keeps the darkness at bay, but you never lose sight of the true horror. Above the basin, water drips from a narrow cleft in the ceiling, fueling a secondary torture known as the drip-drop ordeal. Prisoners were hooded and stretched supine on a rack-like bench, a spongy cloth placed over their faces, and then left to endure endless drops of water that eventually drove them mad. The idea was simple: a single drop to the same spot on the forehead repeated until nerves burned and the mind unraveled. Mainstream sources cite its practice during witch trials in 16th century Germany, with confessions attributed to patients who claimed they felt as if the water died and resurrected on their brow. Historians still argue whether the drip-drop method was officially sanctioned or confined to rogue inquisitors. You move to a side table where two wooden buckets sit stacked. One is perforated with dozens of tiny holes in early showerhead. You muse, if a medieval one. The other is solid and heavier. A 16th century household ledger from a Venetian palace notes buckets like these were used in private interrogations, water heated over coals, then poured to scald or simply to increase shock. Flicking a finger through the holes, you note how easily water would spray, cooling after endless dripping. DIY water torture kit, you murmur, complete with deluxe shower option. A pile of folded cloths lies nearby, faded through repeated use. These linen shrouds were soaked in water and vinegar, or sometimes in a vinegar and urine mix for extra sting. You unwrap one and smell the sour tang vinegar strong enough to burn if pressed against raw skin, a tige. Account suggests some torturers used olive oil instead, coating the cloth to simulate drowning without fully submerging the victim. You breathe in deeply, tasting the acrid vinegar in the back of your throat. Spa day vibes, you whisper. Eyes rolling, your torchlight flickers as you notice scratches on the bench beside the perforated, bucket-deep grooves carved by prisoners. Or perhaps left by someone testing escape routes. You touch one groove gently. It's smooth from wear. Surprisingly, some yanked at the cloth to free themselves, pulling it taut until the metal edges sliced paper-thin slits in fabric and in flesh. You imagine the rhythm: pull, tear, pull, gasp, and are forced under again. The waterlogged cycle must have felt endless. At the chamber's entrance, you see a small hatch with a wooden plug. Behind it lies a cistern fed by rainwater, fresh source for torture. Or so you think, until you notice algae mats and dead insects bobbing in the gloom. A medieval record from a Bavarian castle notes that suspicious tardiness in replacing the plug led to an unpleasant surprise for a visiting inquisitor whose robe became slick with muck. Scholars still argue whether that incident was real or an icy jest played by the castle steward, You lean against the wall, letting the cold stone cradle your back. Ah. The mist from the basin drifts around you, chilling your hair and skin. You taste moisture in the air, a dampness that clings to your lungs. A stray thought talks of water's duality, life-giver and killer. You recall the honey-coated walls from Section 1, the saltwater ropes from the rack chamber, and now this aquatic gauntlet. Medieval engineers recognized water's power, harnessing both its flow and its cessation to break body and spirit. Crouching once more, you glance into the basin. A half-forgotten wooden spatula lies there, likely used to clear algae or to stir additives in the water. It reminds you of a ladle in a soup kitchen, a grotesque reversal of nurture. You hold it up, the torchlight gleaming off its worn surface. A sardonic joke crosses your mind. Soup's on tonight's special. Panic, consomme. You gently set the spatula back, the clink against stone like a final punctuation, rising. You let your eyes drift upward to the dripping cleft again, where one errant drop glimmers before plunging into the basin. You count the seconds between plinks to, maybe 3 enough time to pray or cower. Your breath steadies, and you bend forward to sling the rope over your shoulder, imagining hauling a body free once it's broken the will. You catch yourself and smile wryly. Self-service water torture, no lifeguard on duty. With a final look at the basin and its pulley, you slip away, your footsteps muffled on the wet stone. Behind you, the drip-drip continues steady, unrelenting, an aquatic metronome of medieval cruelty. You carry the memory of cold water rushing over your face, of fear rising as quickly as the tide, and press on into the twisting passages ahead. You ease through a narrow slit and descend a flight of worn stone steps into a chamber sealed by a stout oak door. As it creaks shut behind you, the torchlight retreats into pitch darkness. You stand in absolute blackness, your palms pressed flat against cold, damp walls that seem to pulse with centuries of silence. The air is cool, but still, carrying a faint hint of mold and aged tobacco, remnants of a monk's pipe, perhaps, smoked during forbidden nightly vigils. You inhale slowly, tasting the earthy damp that clings to your throat, and realize your heartbeat sounds unnaturally loud in your ears. You take a tentative step forward, arms outstretched, fingertips grazing the rough-hewn stones. A sudden thought flickers. Great, I've just discovered the world's worst blackout party. You suppress a chuckle. Humor is your torch now. Somewhere above, a single iron ring anchored into the ceiling waits to secure a hooded prisoner. In full suspension, one strand to hold the body aloft, another to silence limbs. Mainstream accounts from 14th century monastic Inquisition records describe such chambers beneath abbeys, where suspected heretics or wayward clergy endured solitary confinement for up to 40 days. They emerged pale, voiceless, and often insane. Having lost track of time in the engulfing dark, your hand slips on the slick stone floor. No, and you steady yourself by grasping a carved pillar. K bears an inscription in faded Latin, Quia Veritas. In umbra latet, because truth lies hidden in darkness. The irony isn't lost on you. A fringe anecdote suggests that some chamber walls were painted deep black to absorb every stray glimmer of light, forcing prisoners to navigate by memory alone. Whispered that a prisoner's hallucinations were recorded by scribes in adjacent cells, their transcripts later used to assist in trials. Historians still argue whether those transcripts are genuine confessions or scripted theatrical pieces meant to scare dissenters into obedience. You feel your way along a low bench embedded in the wall. It's roughly hewn, but smoothed in places, as though someone repeatedly perched there to brace against creeping delirium. The bench ends at a shallow trough carved into the flagstones, originally meant to catch tears or drool, depending on how lenient the inquisitor felt. You press your knee against the trough's lip, listening to the echo of your breath drop into darkness. A soft joke surfaces in your mind. I guess this is what they mean by a tearjerker. You fight the urge to giggle. The darkness feels almost too intimate for laughter as your eyes adjust, though. There's nothing to see. You sense the room's dimensions. Small enough that you could stretch your arms and touch both walls, yet large enough to drown out distant sounds. Back in section 13, you heard water dripping. Here, you hear nothing but your own pulse. It's uncanny how silence can sharpen every other sense. You lean back, your head brushing the ceiling's rough stone, and imagine a hood slipped over your eyes. The world would slip away, leaving only thoughts to swirl in that void. Your fingertips find a small alcove carved into the wall, and you discover a wooden peg beside it. On closer inspection, it swivels like a latch, releasing a hidden compartment containing a single quill and a scrap of parchment. The quill's tip is frayed, its shaft stained brown. Monastic logs from the late 1300s mention penance writing, where prisoners, after hours, alone in darkness, were allowed to scribe prayers or come to write psalms on scrapped cloth until dawn. Fringe legends claim some used these scraps to code messages, smuggling curses against their captors. Historians still argue whether such clandestine inkings ever altered the course of trials or simply added to monastic drama. You stand and shuffle forward, feeling the uneven floor fade into shallow ridges on intentional feature to disorient. Your soles catch on one ridge, forcing you to steady your balance. Beneath your feet is the faint outline of a circle scored into the stones. The circle might have marked the prisoner's standing space, or perhaps a point to focus on when darkness turned to dread. You hover your hand above it, fingers twitching. A small quip surfaces, found the VIP spot very important, penitent. You suppress the grin, mindful that solitude here was anything but VIP. As you continue, your hand grazes a rough patch on the wall where tiny iron brads are embedded. They form a loose patterned stars. Horseshoes. It's hard to tell. One from its socket. It's warm from friction. Its end blunt. Some say monks hammered nails into walls to measure a prisoner's sanity by how many times they return to the same spot, running fingers along the iron. Another fringe notion holds that certain nails were coated in mild irritants, like crushed nettles, so touching the walls elicited painful jolts. You nibble on a plan to test it, then think better of it. Maybe not tonight. A faint breeze whispers through a hairline crack above, hinting at a hidden ventilation shaft. Through it, you imagine a glimmer of pale dawn light or the distant crow of a rooster's signals of freedom you'd never see until your cell reopened. You raise your head, steeling yourself against the hush, and recall how monastic torturers believed. Darkness stripped away pretense, leaving only the sinner's true essence. This method relied not on chains or spikes, but on the mind's collapse under unending isolation. On a lower ledge, you feel an odd constellation of grooves, like the tracks from a small sliding panel. Press along and click a stone slab. Shifts inward, revealing a cold sanctuary bowl. It's empty now, but parchment notes refer to bittersweet nourishment. Stale breadcrumbs soaked in brine and vinegar slid through this slot once daily. A dire menu. Salt water and moldy loaf, enough to sustain life but starve hope. A wry thought drifts through. Gourmet cellar, dining at its bleakest. You resist laughter, letting the irony hang in the air. You step back into the black, guided only by memory. Your confidence wavers as you wonder how long you could endure such conditions before senses fray completely. The absence of time, of vibration, of sights, it all presses in, making every heartbeat feel like an ocean wave. A chilling notion, prisoners lost track of self, sometimes forgot to breathe. You lean against the wall, arms folded, breathing deeply. To anchor yourself, faint, distant sounds tease the silence, a drip of water or a mouse scurrying beyond the wall. You can't be sure. Each unknown noise sends adrenaline racing through you. A light joke flutters. Best ASMR you'll never see. That's enough. You remind yourself that darkness isn't empty. It's alive with memory and anticipation. You feel the cell's boundary in your mind more than your hands. It's tracing its shape in mental relief. Your fingertips brush the ceiling beam one last time, its fingers catching on a small nick where the wood meets stone. It might mark the height of a hooded prisoner or the end of a monk's pole if they needed to climb out in escape or madness. A sly thought pops up. I wonder if Houdini ever tried this cell. You smile at the absurd crossover, then clamp down on humor. This place was designed to erase jokes, not entertain them. Gently, you backtrack toward the door's latch by memory alone. You find the latch, slide it open, and step back into a thin shaft of gray light. Your eyes sting with sudden brightness as the stone corridor beckons you forward. You inhale the mingled scents of torch smoke and damp earth sensory anchors that tether you to reality again. One final quip arises. From pitch black to Porter's Walk, my commute's never been so dramatic. You turn away from the cells. Yawning mouth. In the silence behind you, darkness settles like a living thing, waiting for its next occupant. Historians still argue whether sensory deprivation chambers were primarily spiritual devices or precursors to modern psychological torture. But standing on this threshold, you know one thing for certain. The mind, starved of everything, becomes its own tormentor. You step back into the corridor, carrying that weight of quiet terror and fragile relief, ready for the final descent into tomorrow's dawn. You emerge into a stark hallway, torchlight flickering over uneven stones that once bore the weight of every rack and wheel you encountered. Now, these halls stand silent witnesses to a legacy that stretches into our modern world. After the French Revolution abolished judicial torture in 1789, European nations gradually outlawed medieval methods one by one. And by the early 19th century, the rack had been officially retired from every prison in France and England. Yet hints of its specter still haunt justice systems. Electric chairs and lethal injections replaced stretching beams. But the impulse to control bodies underlies them all. Historians still argue whether abolishing devices truly ended the thirst for coercion or merely recast it. In newer instruments of state power, you touch the smooth stone wall where an exhibit placard once stood, illustrating how international law now prohibits cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. The United Nations Convention Against Torture, drafted in 1984, codified that principle, offering legal recourse that medieval victims could only dream of. But even today, televised scenes of waterboarding or suspension torture in war zones echo. That drip from Section 13 and the cat's paw's unrelenting pull. Fringe rumor insists that a handful of underground torture reenactment clubs operate worldwide, where thrill seekers pay to be shackled in replica devices. You chuckle. Nervously would-be sadists in hoodies, swapping tickets for rack sessions. Historians still argue whether those modern recreations cross the line from education to exploitation. Ahead, you spot glass cases where once the Iron Maiden and Judas Cradle were displayed as curiosities. Now, many museums debate whether such relics glorify cruelty or serve as sobering warnings. Some curators conceal devices in storage, preferring to preserve dignity over sensationalism. Others place them under spotlights with testimonies of real victims, hoping to transform shock into empathy. You lean forward, imagining the Iron Maiden's blackened spikes gleaming under sterile leads, its coffin shape whispering legends more potent than any physical use. A light aside drifts through your mind. Museum gift shop sells medieval earplugs just $9.99. Yet behind the joke, you sense a genuine tension. Do we plaster our past before us until we learn from it, or bury it to spare our conscience? Pop culture has kept these instruments alive in new guises. Horror films and video games resurrect the rack as the stretch, the wheel as the grinder, and the pear as the pedal. Escape rooms offer guests timed challenges to free themselves from mock stocks or thumbscrews. Do you imagine your own YouTube channel trending? Torture Room, IRL 24-hour challenge. 3 jokes bounce in your head. No bathroom breaks. Heartbeat, monitor optional. No refunds if you confess. Behind the laughter lies a sobering truth. Entertainment often sanitizes suffering, muting history's moral alarm. Historians still argue whether gamified cruelty desensitizes society or deepens awareness. Walking on, you pass a small library of legal tomes. Cases appear where defense lawyers cite horrors of the past to argue against modern solitary confinement or sensory deprivation. Section 14's total darkness reemerges in their pages as proof that deprivation breaks minds as surely as spikes break flesh. You imagine sleepless nights in stark cells, waging mental battles no torturer could win outright. A stray thought ticks your ribs. Sensory deprivation retreats luxury escape for the overstimulated. You smile, society's pendulum swings wildly between fear and comfort. The corridor opens into a modern gallery, where survivors' testimonies play on loop. A retired judge recounts how reading about the scavenger's daughter in law school seeded his resolve to forbid cruel interrogation. A neuroscientist describes how the drip-drop torture can induce post-traumatic stress identical to combat trauma. Those voices reflect the real cost of devices that once prided themselves on slow precision. You pause, sensing the weight of every confession wrung out under the rack. Every bone crushed by the thumbscrew, as real and raw as it was 600 years ago. You press your palm to the cool glass that separates you from a preserved thumbscrew. The screw's threads frozen mid-turn. That moment captures the pivot from force to reform, the junction where public revulsion birthed legal safeguards. Yet you know the line remains thin. Tyrants still find new wheels to break spirits. Domestic spaces trade medieval stocks for social media. Shaming, weaponizing humiliation over the ether rather than the pillory's plank. A final joke surfaces. Welcome to the 21st century. Torture 2.0 mood algorithms optional. You laugh softly, aware that humor must stand guard against despair. You turn away from the gallery, torchlight guiding you toward the exit. Each device you pass track, cradle, maiden, wheel, stocks, daughter, pear, rippers, bowl, rack hook. Ropes, water basin, deprivation cell has left an echo, a ripple in time. Their shadows cross right into our laws, our art, our screens. And you, standing on the threshold, carry both history's scars and its lessons as silence settles. You close your eyes and let relief wash over you in soft waves, like a gentle tide beneath a pale moon. You feel the weight of the corridor lift. Every torch flicker fading behind you as warmth seeps back into your limbs. No more ratchets, no more iron teeth only. The slow, kind rhythm of your own breath. The stone underfoot becomes a memory, replaced by your mattress's welcoming give. The cool pulse of sheets at your back, the soft cradle of pillows under your head. Let your thoughts drift without the sting of steel or the sting of saltwater ropes. Your heart forgetting the echo of bone breaking. Inhale deeply and exhale any lingering dread, letting it slip through your fingers like sand. Feel your muscles unclench, tension dissolving with each exhale until all that remains is calm. You are safe here, beyond chains and cruelty, held by the gentlest arms of now and tomorrow. Imagine a dove's wings brushing your skin. A breeze, stirring curtains, the hush of twilight wrapping the world in comfort. You've walked through the darkest corners of history, but now you stand in a room painted only in the soft gray of dawn. In this quiet space, remember that cruelty can inspire justice, that remembrance can bring renewal, and that kindness grows. From seeds planted in sorrow, to carry this calm into your sleep. Let your dreams be free from rattling chains and dripping water, guided instead by moonbeams and soft whispers. Sleep well, knowing the past's horrors have led us to promise a gentler dawn. End of script. Sweet dreams.